בערב, שבויה בחלומה, העיר אשר בדד יושבת, ובליבה חומה. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. חזרנו אל בורות המים, לשוק ולכיכר, שופר קורא בהר הבית, בעיר העתיקה, ובמרות אשר בסלע, אלפי שמשות זורחות, ושוב נרד לים המלח בדרך יריחו. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני אך בבואי היום לשיר לך ולך לקשור כתרים, קטנתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרון המשוררים, כי שמך צורף את השפתיים כנשיקת צרף. אם אשכחך ירושלים אשר כולה זהב, ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני
Shalom, shalom, my friends. I just want to greet you all in the name of Yeshua. It's such a beautiful week, and we have every reason to thank the Lord, for this is the day that the Lord has made. We have every reason to rejoice, every reason to be glad, every reason to thank God for his faithfulness in our lives. We are in the midst of the dire streets. We are in the midst between the 17th of Tammuz to the 9th of Av. We have one more week before the 9th of Av, which is a special day of fast. We are in the days of distress, the days of, in Hebrew it's called Bein ha-Metzarim. And I like what the Magid of Metzrek said, that these are special days. These are days of prayer. These are days to really seek out the Lord. These 3 weeks, these are not just ordinary days. These are not just any other days, but these are special days that Hashem is requiring us to take time to focus on him. The Magid, in giving another interpretation to the book of Lamentations 1:3, the last part says that all her pursuers overtook her in the streets. That's where we get the concept of the dire straits of the Bein ha-Metzarim. The Magid, he said that all who pursue or all who desire a closeness with God can reach that closeness within the days of distress, within the days of Bein ha-Metzarim. So these are special days, friends. We have every reason to really rejoice. So last Thursday, I came and I talked about the power of Rachel's actions, of what she did. What she did in the present changed her past, rectified it, and not only changed her present, but had hope for the future. This coming week, we are going to celebrate Tish B'Av. Tish B'Av, or the 9th of Av, is the 9th day of the month of Av, is considered the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. Even in biblically, it is a day in which we fast. It is a day where we deprive ourselves and pray. It is the culmination of the 3 weeks which we started on the 17th of Tammuz, a period of 3 weeks during which we mark the destruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. On the 9th of Av, the spies returned to the promised land with frightening reports, and the Israelites basically denied their desire to enter into the promised land. Both the temples in Jerusalem, the first temple and the second temple, was destroyed on the 9th of Av. The Bar Kokhba revolt took place on the 9th of Av. In 1290, the Jews were expelled out of England on the 9th of Av. In 1492, the Jews were sent out of Spain on the 9th of Av. Both World War I and World War II took place on the 9th of Av. So it's very important. In fact, this next week on Wednesday, July the 29th evening at sunset, we begin the fast all throughout on July the 30th. So Wednesday evening to Thursday evening next week is when the 9th of Av is observed. We do not eat or drink. We do not wear leather clothing. It's not recommended to work, but those of you who have to work can work. But the focus is to take time to remember, why have we reached where we are? What is the reason of the destruction of the temple? And these are days that we focus, especially on the 9th of Av. We take time to read the book of Lamentations. We read Ekarabah, the writings and the interpretations and the commentaries of what Lamentations is about. We take time to refocus our own lives. We take time to set us up and prepare ourselves to do something in the present so that it would rectify the past and it would change our future. So with this in mind, let us look forward for today also. Today, I want to take time to focus on another concept concerning the ninth of Av. I want to talk about the idea of something in Hebrew which is called sinat kinam, which basically in English is baseless hatred. But before that, I want to begin with an illustration. I thought it's a powerful illustration. A snake entered a carpentry shop, and as it crawled to the corner, it went through a saw and hurt itself a little bit. At that time, he turned and bit the saw. And biting the saw, he hurt himself badly in the mouth. And then, not understanding what was happening to him and thinking that the saw was basically attacking him, he decided to roll around the saw as if wanting to suffocate him with his whole body and shaking with all its strength. It was so unfortunate that the snake ended up being killed by the saw. Sometimes we react in anger, thinking about hurting those who hurt us. But in fact, by doing that, we are hurting ourselves. In life, sometimes it is better to forgive situations, to forgive people, to forgive offenses, because if we don't, the consequences of unforgiveness, bitterness is so irreversible, and it is very dangerous, not only for our lives, but for our souls. So think about it. Sinat kinam. What is baseless hatred anyway? Many have a problem with Tish B'Av, the ninth of Av. I know that sounds terrible, but to say there's an issue, we all know there's a famous saying quoted in the Talmud, Yoma 9, where it says that the temple was only destroyed because of Sinat Kinan, baseless hatred. So if there's a spiritual remedy to be undertaken on Tish B'Av, it is clearly to banish baseless hatred from our hearts. We have to resolve never to feel baseless hatred. We pray and ask God's assistance. We may join Facebook campaigns. We engage in acts of ahavat kidan, basically meaning baseless love. Just love people for no reason rather than hate people for no reason. But friends, here's the problem. Honestly, how many of you are tempted to hate someone baselessly? When was the last time you were walking down some street and all of a sudden you saw somebody and you says, oh, there's Raja, or there is Ravi, or whoever. I hate him. There's no reason. Baseless. We don't do that. I mean, are you like that? Is anyone you know like that? Are we creating some kind of scarecrow with baseless hatred that just doesn't exist? And then we congratulate ourselves that we don't have this terrible sin? Well, great, you're not a psychopath. You're proud of that, right? What if every year we congratulate ourselves about how we purged sinat kinam, baseless hatred from our hearts? We no longer hate people baselessly, as if you did first in the first place, as if. So think about with me, friends, this evening. Sinat kinam, baseless hatred. I mean, those are very, very strong words. In real life, you may know that many of us are no strangers to anger. We are not strangers to hatred, sometimes even to rage. But usually, when we get mad at somebody, we get mad at them for some reason. Somebody believes me, I hate them. Is that baseless hatred? It's not baseless hatred. There is a reason why I hate him. So, who feels baseless hatred? I think if we want to experience Tishba Av or the ninth of Av like adults, we sought to over to ourselves to try to come to grips with the question what baseless hatred is. What do we mean when we talk about Sinat Kinat, hatred for no reason? Because there is an indicious possibility that every year we may congratulate ourselves of getting rid of baseless hatred, but we don't even know what baseless hatred is to begin with. Maybe what it really is continues to lurk in our hearts to poison our minds, and it may even poison our relationships. So it turns out there is a fundamental piece in the Talmud that exemplifies or helps us understand this idea of sinat kinam or baseless hatred. Traditionally, it is learned, this is what we learn on Tish B'Av. If we go to the tractate of Gittin 55 and 56, where it deals with a famous apocryphal story of somebody called Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. What I want to do with you today is to analyze the story and read it through and try to figure out, looking at the story, what Sinat Kinam is really is. Because the strange thing is that we read the story, when we read the story, it doesn't seem to be all about baseless hatred at all. I think if we read the story with clear eyes, we will arrive at a surprising understanding of the nature of Sinat Kinam, of baseless hatred. It is not something that monsters deal with or psychopaths deal with, hatred for no reason. Indeed, the kind of baseless hatred the Gemara talks about is uncomfortably close to home for each and every one of us. So as we begin to look at the story, let me ask you some questions. When was the last time you got mad at someone? Think about what was the situation, with whom were you angry, why were you angry, and what did you do in your anger? These are questions you don't have to tell me, but you need to answer for yourself. So concerning this episode, or concerning what the Talmud says, it says that it was because, the sages say that it was because of the episode of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa that Jerusalem was destroyed. The question is the Gemara telling us something historically that actually happened? More than likely it is apocryphal, but the kind of event in some essential way which takes place here is responsible for the destruction of Jerusalem in the eyes of the sages. So the question is, what kind of event is it? Listen to me, with me, the story. This is the story which the Talmud records. So there was this guy who had a friend by the name of Kamsa and an enemy by the name of Bar Kamsa. One day this fellow makes a great feast. He invites everyone. The great sages of the time were invited. All his buddies were invited. And he tells his servants, among all the people on my guest list, go and invite Kamsa, my friend. The servant mistakenly addresses the invitation and accidentally brought it to Bar Kamsa instead. Who is Bar Kamsa? Bar Kamsa is none other than his enemy. So the feast begins, and as everyone is dining under the fine chandeliers, the Baal Simcha, the feast maker, is making his way through the guests, saying hello to everyone. And then out of the corner of his eye, he sees Bar Kamsa sitting down at his feast. He approaches and says, let's see, you are my enemy. What are you doing here? Get up and leave. So Bar Kamsa replies, since I'm already here, can you please leave me? I'll even pay for the cost of my food and my drink here. And he responds, says, no. So Bar Kamsa says, I'll pay half of for your whole feast. He says, no. Then Bar Kamsa goes on to say, I will pay for the entire feast, the whole wedding banquet. It's on me. Just let me stay. He says, no. Then the Talmud goes on to say that he picks him up physically and throws him out of his feast. That's the first part of the episode in this story. Then the next part of the episode is the spotlight now turns to Bar Kamsa. He says to himself, the rabbis were there. They saw all this and they didn't protest. Evidently, they were okay with all these things. I am going to get my revenge. What if I can find a way to get the Romans involved here? Of course, in this time, we need to understand at the last days of the Second Temple, Rome was political and military control of Rome was the political and military control of Israel. And while the Jews do have self-government, they are unfortunately or ultimately answerable to Rome. So Bar Kamsa goes and he tells Caesar. Now the commentators say that it was not actual Caesar, but it was a Roman procurator who was in charge of Jerusalem at that time. And he goes and tells this Roman guy in charge that the Jews are rebelling against you. So the procurator says, the general sends back word who says and asks Bar Kamsa, who says, how do I know what you're saying is really true? And Bar Kamsa says, why don't you send an offering to their temple? And let's see if they will offer it to you or if they will refuse. So the procurator says, good idea. And he sends back with Bar Kamsa 3 calves to be offered on behalf of Rome in the Jewish temple. As Bar Kamsa is bringing the animals to the temple, what he does, he cuts the upper lip of each of the animals. Now, the reason he does that is because there is a law that the animal that is a Baal Mum, which is an animal that has some sort of blemish, the scriptures say that may not be offered in the temple. So Bar Kamsa was actually creating a blemish in which each of these animals, in each of these animals, but he is doing so very, very cleverly. Why? Because the Romans also understood the idea of not offering animals with a blemish. They gave sacrifices to pagan gods and they wouldn't sacrifice a blemished animal either. But Bar Kamsa here, he cleverly cut the upper lip of each of the animals. It is a kind kind of a wound that the Romans would not consider a blemish, but Torah law would recognize it as blemish. So the animals arrive at the temple and the rabbinic authorities see that these are blemished animals, but they also see that they have actually come from Rome. So now these rabbis now have a dilemma. So the rabbis, their initial response was to offer the offerings anyway, despite the blemishes, because peace with the authorities takes precedent over the technical requirements of sacrificial law. They are making a halakhic judgment. Peace outweighs these concerns about whether the animal is a Baal Mum or not. And that's what they are going to do, except for an objection levied by one fellow, a rabbi whose name was Rabbi Zechariah ben Avukulos, who said, we can't do it. If we offer these animals, the people will get a wrong idea. They'll say blemished animals are allowed to be offered on the altar. It would be very dangerous and catastrophic, and we cannot allow it to happen. So the rabbis were stuck. They weren't going to offer the offering, but they understood the terrible implications of rejecting Rome's offering. So they cast about for another solution. They thought maybe let's kill Bar Kamsa so he wouldn't go back to Rome and tell them, see, they have rejected your offering. But Rabbi Zechariah ben Avokulos, the same rabbi, said, we can't do that either, because people will get the wrong idea. People will say that someone who intentionally places a blemish in a consecrated animal is liable to death penalty. So we can't offer the offerings, and we cannot even touch Bar Kamsa. So they rejected the offering, and Bar Kamsa went back with the news of the rejection of the offering back to Rome. Years later, the Gemara, it records Rabbi Yochanan, the great sage in Israel, who lived centuries after this incident, said the unwise humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avokulos is responsible for destroying the Holy Temple. As explained by some of the commentators, Rabbi Zechariah's argument was really, who are we to make such weighty decisions to countervail the law of blemishes? People would get the wrong idea. Who are we to take matters into our own hands? We didn't have broad enough shoulders to make these kind of decisions, and it was wrong-headed humility that ended up destroying the temple. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says, and many other sages also say. So let's get back to the story. So what happened after, the next thing that happened after the offerings of Rome was rejected? Nero, the Caesar, got word of this brazen refusal of Judea to offer Rome's offerings. He came to wage a campaign against Jerusalem. And as he was coming, he must have had the sense as he approached the holy city that he was making a momentous campaign against the God of Israel. So he stopped for a moment before destroying the city. He took an arrow from his quiver and he put it in his bow, and he shot it in an eastward direction. The arrow went and fell on an exact direct line pointing towards Jerusalem. He shot an arrow towards the west. It fell on an exact line to Jerusalem. He shot an arrow on all four directions, and it landed in the exact same place, pointing him towards Jerusalem. And at that moment, he caught a sight of a Jewish child wandering in the outskirts of Jerusalem. So he said to this little kid, "Tell me, son, what have you been learning in school?" And the child said, "We just happen to be studying this verse in Ezekiel chapter 25, verse 14, where it says, God says that I will ultimately take my vengeance on Edom, on Rome, through my people Israel." And at that point, Nero put two and two together and said to himself, I understand what's going on here. The master of the universe, the mighty God, is looking to destroy his own house. He's looking to wash his hands with this guy, with me. So I'm not going to be the scapegoat here. I'm not interested. And he left the campaign, went back, and he resigned from his commission, and basically he got converted, is what it says. Now let's begin to understand what happened here. The first thing, Nero basically saw two things. The first thing he saw that his arrows, no matter where he shot them, ended up in Jerusalem. The second thing he saw was a child that started talking verses to him. The arrows basically convinced him that God was interested in destroying his own house, destroying Jerusalem, that God's anger was going to be taken out of Jerusalem. The second thing that he saw convinced him was that despite the fact that God was the one who wanted to destroy Israel, Rome will be the one who will pay for it. The verse that the child tells him about is that the vengeance of God will be kindled against Rome, Ezekiel 25:14. He looks at the situation and he says, this isn't fair. I'm not going to take the fall for God. If you want to destroy your house, you destroy your house. Don't blame it on me. This Roman supervisor, he basically resigned his post. He converted to Judaism, and this man basically became the ancestor of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was one of the famous, most great rabbis Israel ever had. But at last, the campaign of Rome was picked up by Vespasian, and ultimately the temple was destroyed. Now, there are these 4 episodes in the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story. Let me help you understand. The interaction between the feast maker and Bar Kamsa is episode number 1. Bar Kamsa's decision to vengeance against the rabbi is episode number 2. Rome's attempt to send an offering to the temple is episode number 4. And Nero's aborted campaign against Jerusalem is episode number 4. So 3 and 4. Rome's attempt to send an offering to the temple is episode of 3, and Nero's aborted campaign against Jerusalem is episode number 4. So at face value, these 4 episodes are just dots on a timeline. They have nothing to do with each other than chronology. First this happened, then the next thing happened, then the other one happened, and then the other one happened. But I would like to suggest that these 4 episodes are more than dots on a timeline. They are thematic elements that basically repeat themselves. There is this kind of rage, there is this kind of anger that is expressed in each of these episodes. And there is something common about the nature of that anger. And when we strip everything away, what are the commonalities and of the kind of rage that is being left in these stories is the question. So if we can isolate them, I think then we can really understand the secret of baseless hatred in our hands. We will understand what it means in this story, and we will also understand what it means in our own lives. The question is, what do these stories have in common? And how are these stories connected? How do we apply it to our own life? Okay, so in our quest to try to find this common denominator in these 4 instances of sort of untrammeled rage, which I think we see in the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa stories, I need to ask the question, do you think the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story is about monsters, or is it about regular people? When you look at what happens, the kind of expressions of really unbated rage, do you see what do you see in these stories? They seem to be monstrous. What the maker of the feast does to Bar Kamsa doesn't seem normal. I mean, here is Bar Kamsa. He's pleading to please just be allowed to stay, and I will basically pay for the meal. Then he goes on to say that I will pay for half of the feast or the whole feast. It's embarrassing and it's a mistake. Just don't throw me out. You know your heart reaches out to this man. But the maker of the feast is just he's just shut to his cries. He throws him out and he makes such a monstrous thing to do. And the next thing, what happens? Bar Kamsa, he acts also very monstrous also. What is he thinking? He's not thinking about this guy who's thrown him out. He's thinking about the rabbis. Oh, these guys, the great teachers of Israel, they were there. They were silent. Oh, okay, they shouldn't have been silent. Now you're going to come up, and because they were silent, you're going to come up with this libel as to slander, as a slander to Rome, that the Jews are rebelling against you. You're going to threaten the lives of hundreds and thousands of your own countrymen? Are you crazy, Bar Kamsa? It's a monstrous thing to do. So the question is, are these stories about monsters, or are these stories about man? Friends, I want to argue that these stories are about man and not about psychopaths. You know, it is easy to say, there are these crazy people in the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story. So if they're crazy, then the story doesn't mean much to you and me, does it? But if the story isn't about crazy people, the question is, what if that kind of evil which was there in Bar Kamsa, in the feast maker, and in all these stories, what if that kind of rage or that kind of evil is there in each and every one of us? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. The kind of rage that you see in these stories, I want to suggest that is what I want to suggest is something that can sneak up even among the best of us. This kind of rage we see in the story, is possible that this rage is there also in some of us. The Kamsa and Bar Kamsa stories are teaching us about a process through which we all can be deceived by our feelings. We can be consumed with anger, and worse than that, convinced that we are right. The problem with much of our generation, much of our people today, is that we just go with our feelings, and we are convinced that our feelings are correct. The problem with that is the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa says that we can also be deceived with our feelings. We can be consumed with anger, and worse than that, we can be convinced that our anger is right. It is a sin to let go of that anger, because look how righteous righteousness, rage or anger is. How justified my anger is. Where does the sense come from, friends? What convinces us that our anger is truly so righteous? I think our immediate instinct that we are right to be so angry is not just a product of self-delusion or subjectivity. It actually comes from somewhere. It is almost reasonable to say that it is a product of two fail-safe mechanisms that we all have within ourselves. We have certain instinctive fail-safe mechanisms that are there to actually filter our feelings of anger. They basically work pretty well most of the time in keeping us honest, in making sure that we do feel angry, and that anger is more or less justified, or if it is not justified, at least understandable. But these instinctive fail-safe mechanisms that we have, they are not foolproof, and that's where sometimes we, my friends, can become deceived. Let me explain to you what I'm talking about. What is the fail-safe mechanism number one? Here is our first level of defense against feelings. It is a strong feeling of unjustified anger. What we call it is our reaction thermostat. In other words, within us, when we get angry about something, we have this thermostat, like a thermometer. We have this thermostat within us. It's called our reaction thermostat. For every provocation, there is this little thermostat inside your head that judges how much of provocation you really suffered. And therefore, according to the provocation you have suffered, what kind of response you should give. For example, you go to the supermarket, somebody cuts in front of you in the line in the supermarket. So a little thermostat inside of your head says, well, that is a level 3 provocation, and it deserves a level 3 response. And you just stab the guy in front and says, hey buddy, who cut your line? And you say, if buddy, you have cut in front of me, get back to the line. I know it's not a nice way sometimes to say it, but if you're a real pious person or a spiritual kind of guy, you will basically tap him on his shoulders and you would say, excuse me, sir, I don't really know if you were intending this, but the line starts back there. I don't want the other people to think that you are cutting them off. But even if you give them a little angry response, hey buddy, the line starts over there, that's also a normal response. A justified response, we can argue about whether it's justified, but normal, yes, it's within the range of normal. Usually, for normal people, that thermostat works correctly. The level 3 provocation, it doesn't deserve a level 9 response. So you don't go. In other words, because he cut the line in front of you in the supermarket, you don't go out to the parking lot, find his car and puncture his tire. That's our thermostat. It works pretty well. It gauges the provocation that we suffer, and it tells us the response of what kind of response that needs to come. Most people have a thermostat like that, and therefore most people can sort of trust themselves that if they feel really angry, it is because they were really, really provoked. That's one thing that gives us a sense that our rage is righteous. I wouldn't feel this angry if I was not provoked pretty badly. That is fail-safe mechanism number one. Here's another thing that actually gives us confidence. It is the second fail-safe mechanism that we have. It's the kind of backup instinct that is sort of a safeguard that if for some reason our thermostat didn't work so carefully, the rage that we are feeling is unjustified. There is a way that we can sort of climb down off that emotional mountain, and I'm going to call it the instinctive fact checker. We are willing to let go of our rage if we check our facts and we see that we are wrong. Once I know that I'm wrong, the question is, should I really be angry at this person? And if we decide the answer is no, my answer is totally unjustifiable against him, we can let go of it. Anger is not so all-consuming that once I feel it, I'm completely out of control. If I'm convinced that I'm wrong and this person doesn't need to be the object of my anger, I can let go. For example, we are driving down the highway one night. It is dark. It is a rainy night. You're minding your own business, and as you're driving down this road, then all of a sudden some car comes out of the blue. He smashes into you, and just before the car smashes into you, you notice out of the corner of your eye that there was this light of the cell phone in the front seat, and you're thinking to yourself, this guy is texting while he's driving in the rain, and you're really, really angry. You get out of the car, but as you get close, you realize that it was not the driver who was texting, it was the passenger that was holding the cell phone. Then you look in front of the car and you see in front of this car there is this huge bark of a tree that has come down in front of them, and it basically hit the car, and it basically caused him to come into your lane. Most people, when you see all these things, first you're angry, then as you try to negotiate between things and you try to go through the fact checker, then all of a sudden most people, we let go of our rage, we reach out our hand to help the person out of the car, and if we see there is a mistake, we see there is no reason to be angry of this person, we can let go. But because we have these two fail-safe mechanisms, because on one hand we can trust our thermostat, we don't just overreact for no reason, and then the odd chance that if we do, we can let go of our rage if we see there is no reason to be angry at this person. Because at the end I will do, because of that, when I do end up feeling really, really angry, I say to myself that I am probably right. The reason I'm really, really angry is because I'm probably right. And there is something, when I think that my anger is justified, then something very, very dangerous happens. What do? My rage all of a sudden is, my rage is no longer just rage. My rage is now righteous rage. A righteous rage that does not want to be denied. To get a feel for this, just go back to the case with the car. Imagine that as you approach the car, it wasn't the passenger, but it was the driver with the cell phone. It wasn't a rainy night. There was no bark of a tree, and he didn't just care that he hit you. Now the question you need to ask yourself, if this was the scenario, are you going to let him go off? Your wife, because of the accident, is on a wheelchair. Your son or your daughter has 6 months of physical therapy in front of you. And by luck, you have basically walked away with your life. and you approach the guy on the car window, and the guy says, "What's the matter, buddy? I'm just a cricket fan. I just needed to check the score." In that kind of situation, what do? That's a righteous anger. There's a part of you that says it is a sin to let go of that kind of anger. Once I convince myself that I am in the right of being angry, I see it is a sin to back down. What are you going to do to get away with this? I'm going to be walked all over. My family is going to be walked all over. No, my anger is justified. You're telling me don't get upset. No, I'm angry. Righteous anger doesn't want to be denied. And thus, this is where even the best intentions of us can slip up. What if those two fail-safe mechanisms aren't enough? Maybe your righteous rage isn't so very righteous anymore, and maybe you don't know about it. This is what exactly the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa stories are all about. Every single one of those episodes is about a kind of misplaced righteous rage. Let's look at those stories again and see what is the common denominator of what it really is. What is the main theme that connects all these four stories in the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story? But before that, think with me. Think of a time when you did something crazy and acted in a crazy way. What was the situation? Why did you do it? What did you do? And how did you justify your actions to yourself? Think about a time you employed one of the mechanisms we talked about, this reaction thermostat or this fact checker. And the other question you need to ask yourself is, what is righteous rage? And what is the harm in righteous rage? Very important, friends. We need to ask ourselves. So we talked about these two sort of fail-safe mechanisms that each of us have. It's called the reaction thermostat. Something happens, we react according to the level of what happens. And if we go about, we can also go to the next mechanism. It's called the fact checker. It's called the instinctive fact checker, basically. So basically that you get angry, you check the facts, and the question is there any reason for my anger? What we're going to need to do is to re-look at these stories of what I just talked about, the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story, in a very slow motion. Let's start with the story of the feast maker and Bar Kamsa. The feast maker is making this huge party. It's his first daughter's wedding. He has invited the whole town. He has invited all the authorities, the political figures, even the rabbis. Everybody is there, all of his buddies. And as his guests were happily drinking or clinking their glasses, drinking champagne under the sparkling chandeliers, and as the feast maker is graciously making his way through the guests, greeting everyone, he spies of all people his own enemy, Bar Kamsa. This is the guy, Bar Kamsa is the guy who cheated on him on a business deal 20 years ago. This guy is a dirtbag. They haven't spoken in the last 20 years. The question is, the feast maker is asking, is what on earth is this guy doing here? Let's stop for a moment. Put yourself in the shoes of the feast maker and ask yourself, what is the story he's telling himself now? The feast maker does not know that the servant has made a mistake. So why in his mind is Bar Kamsa here? Who invited him? He knows we are enemies. He knows he wasn't invited. He's crashing my party. Why is he doing this? There could be only one reason. What is that? He is here to deliberately ruin everything for me. He knows that the second I see his face, I'm going to be consumed with anger. And this is going to actually ruin my special night. Is it not enough, bad enough that he's my enemy of 20 years ago? And he has to have the guts to show up here tonight, knowing the kind of effect that it's going to be upon me? Let's stop for a moment, friends. If you are the feast maker right now, what's your level of anger against Bar Kamsa? On a scale from 0 to 10, what is the feast maker feeling right now? I would suggest he's maybe feeling a 9.2. He's really, really angry. Now ask yourself, if the story that he was telling himself was true, is he justified in being that angry? Let's say that's why Bar Kamsa was here. He was here just to, he's here just to come and provoke him. Yeah, I mean, that's a really serious provocation. Now you might say it's not nice to get that angry, but is the feast maker's reaction thermostat functioning? Yes, it is a serious provocation met by serious anger and response. Given the narrative that he's telling himself, it's a normal reaction. What happens next? 15 minutes later, the feast maker figures out what really happened. As he looks around the room, he realizes that his best friend Kamsa is missing. How come Kamsa didn't show up? He asked around, seems like he wasn't invited. He wasn't invited? Of course I invited him. And then all of a sudden, for the feast maker, it dawns upon him that there must have been a mistake. His servant messed this up. Now let's look at that for a moment. The moment that the feast maker realizes, yes, it was the servant that messed things up. If the feast maker's rational mind was working, let's ask, who should he be angry at? And how angry should he be at them? Well, he should be angry at the servant. How angry he should be at the servant on a scale of 0 to 10? Well, realizing that the servant is not trying to create a provocation, he just made an honest mistake. On the other side, it's kind of a pain in the neck to have the enemy here. He should be at a 5 level anger at his servant. Now, this is the tricky part, friends. If that is the case, should he be angry at Bar Kamsa? Now, your first instinct might be saying, no. What did Bar Kamsa do? He shouldn't be angry at him at all. But is that correct? Should he be at 0 level of anger at Bar Kamsa? No, that's not correct. Think rationally. Because who is Bar Kamsa? Bar Kamsa is always been the feast maker's enemy. So if the feast maker's mind is working rationally, he's angry at Bar Kamsa as he would have had been with Bar Kamsa even if he never had showed up. He's at 5, a regular garden variety mid-level anger at all times. But that's how he should feel about Bar Kamsa, but that's not how he actually feels about it. What actually happens is that he launches into Bar Kamsa with a fury that can only be described as a 9. He ignores Bar Kamsa's desperate pleas to stay. He throws him out. The feast maker seems to look like a monster. Why? Because both of his fail-safe mechanisms have been evaded. Safety mechanism number 1, we called it the reaction thermostat. The feast maker gets to his initial level anger more or less reasonable. He thinks he was provoked in a terrible way. Bar Kamsa maliciously came to ruin one of his special days. If that is true, it wasn't an overreaction. Once the feast maker comes to realize the real story, here is the chance of the safety valve number 2, the fact checker. What is the fact checker? Am I justified in being angry at this person? And unfortunately, in this case with Bar Kamsa, the answer is yes. I'm justified of being angry at Bar Kamsa. He's this guy who who basically cheated me on a business deal 20 years ago. I should be angry at him. Both the safety valves are evaded. And what happens when both of them are evaded? Now, all of a sudden, righteous anger has to have its way. How angry is he feeling? He's feeling a 9. Again, so it's complicated. He should be at level 5 angry at Bar Kamsa. He should be at level 4 angry with his servant. But he sees Bar Kamsa, and what he does, he basically takes the anger he has with his servant and puts it on Bar Kamsa and dumps his anger and transfers his confidence. And so he's not angry with his servant anymore, and he puts his anger, everything, to level 9 to Bar Kamsa. What's the problem with this, friends? Righteous anger. Righteous anger is a dangerous, contagious beast. Once you evade the fail-safe mechanisms, it's like fire. It spreads. It can burn out of control even without you even knowing about it. That's the thing about the feastmaker and Bar Kamsa. Let's get on to the next episode. Now here we see Bar Kamsa is thrown out of the party. He's sitting there on the floor, listening from outside the wedding hall as the band strikes a new tune. If you are in Bar Kamsa's shoes, what level of anger would you feel now? Why did you come to that party when you suddenly got that invitation from the feastmaker? You haven't talked to the feastmaker for 20 years. It wasn't easy to show up there. But in the interest of peace, you're willing to extend your hand, and then that monster comes and starts yelling at you. And even once he understands the real story, he rejects all your pleas and basically throws you out of the hall. He's a monster. Now, wait for a minute, friends. What is your level of anger? It's a 9.2, baby. But now, ask the question. If Bar Kamsa's mind was working rationally, who would he be angry at? Well, his natural target of anger is the feastmaker. Because he's the one who basically threw him out. But then Bar Kamsa starts to think about the rabbis too. Now, should he be angry at the rabbis? They were silent. They didn't protest. They ought to have protested. It wasn't right. But ask yourself this, friends. How angry should he be at the rabbis? What would be the appropriate level of anger? The same level of anger he feels at Bar Kamsa? No, not really. Less. They weren't the direct perpetrators of this terrible affront. They were caught unawares. They were sitting there. They didn't protest. There are all sorts of reasons why they might have not protested. It might have happened too quickly. They might have been afraid of making a bigger scene. Should they have protested? Yes, maybe they should have protested. How angry should he be at them? Maybe level 5. How angry is he at them? He takes a 9.2 anger that he feels at Bar Kamsa, and he dumps it at the rabbis. Isn't that amazing? The anger he feels at the feastmaker, he takes it and he dumps it at the rabbis. Why? Because all of a sudden, both the fail-safe mechanisms have been evaded. The initial thermostat mechanism number 1. How did he get into 9.2? Was that understandable? Yes. You have suffered a huge provocation. A huge provocation meets with a huge sense of anger. His thermostat was functioning properly. Now the second fail-safe mechanism, when he looks at the rabbis and asks himself, am I justified at being angry at them? What was his response? His response is, yes, I'm justified at being angry at them. He doesn't ask himself, how angry should I be? He asks himself, should I be angry at them? Yes, I should be angry. Now, having concluded the answer is yes, I should be, he takes all of his rage and leashes it out on them. The rage he has to the feastmaker, he puts it on the rabbis. And what does he do? He goes to Rome and he tells, the Jews are rebelling against you. Fascinating. Bar Kamsa, the victim of baseless rage, has now victimized others with baseless rage of his own. Sinat Kinan is a very insidious thing. It can create chain reactions, and chain reactions can spin out of control. Let's look at the next two stories, and we will see the exact same dynamic spinning more and more out of control until it is finally stopped. But before that, how can we work to control our rage, our anger, and refrain from letting it spin out of control? What is the next story in this whole episode? Episode number 3. It's about Rome and the rabbis. Bar Kamsa, he provokes Rome, suggesting to them that the Jews were rebelling against them. When the Roman procurator of Jerusalem challenges us and says, how do you know it is true? Bar Kamsa says, just send them an offering and see if they accept it. Now we know what happens next. Bar Kamsa intentionally places a defect in the offering, and we also know that the rabbis go through some debates as to what to do. The right decision, according to the Gemara, was to accept the offering despite the defect, because Shalom Malkut, the peace with the ruling power, outweighs the normal prohibition of sacrificial law rules. But we know that the rabbis did not make that decision because of one rabbi, Zechariah ben Avukulos, wrong-headed humility, as it were, and instead they rejected the offering. Now, knowing all this, let's come back and replay Rome's reaction very slowly. The word comes back to the Roman procurator that the animal has been rejected. What level of anger does that inspire at the national level in Rome? Their worst fears are confirmed. It is crazy that the Jews are rebelling. It's really true. We send them a goodwill offering. Here we are Rome. We'll build them roads. We'll build them tunnels. We build them bridges, infrastructures. We bring Western democracy, all sorts of wonderful things. We are even willing to have some sort of religious tolerance. We send our difference to their God, an offering from us to them, and only to have them reject the offering and send it back. No, we are not going to we are not offering it. This is outrageous. What level of anger Rome feels? Maybe a 9.2. Now, if Rome's rational mind is working, once Rome finds out the truth, what level of anger, what should be their level of anger? Should they be angry at the rabbis at all? The truth is the rabbis weren't trying to rebel against Rome. They were just caught in these technical considerations. So the explanation comes from the rabbis say, sir, you don't understand. You consider blemish something we don't really consider blemish. That sort of blemish. Now, at that point, if you are Rome, the question is, are you justified in being angry? Of course, you're justified in being angry. What level of anger? A 9.2. I mean, the Jews aren't rebelling against you. It's not like they're trying to reject your offering as an act of politically throwing off the yoke of the oppressor. They're just being small-minded. It's ridiculous, but it's not rebellion. What level of anger should he have? Maybe a 5. But Rome doesn't adjust down to level 5. They come and they get ready to destroy the temple. Why? Because both of these safety valves get evaded. Reaction thermostat and instinctive fear fact checker. Rome dumps their 9.2 level anger on the Jews, even though that level of anger was not justified. Bar Kamsa, in his evil brilliance, has provoked Rome to do exactly what he was provoked to do by the feastmaker. You see the chain reaction. The feastmaker did something, then the feastmaker dumps his anger, whatever he had, on Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa, he dumps all of his anger he had of the feastmaker on the rabbis, And now Rome is now going to dump all their anger, which they had of the rabbis, on the whole Jewish people. Okay, you see what's happening. You see this evil that is going on. It's going on. So let's go to the fourth episode, and we will see the exact same dynamic play out there. The Roman emperor Nero, according to Bar Kamsa's legend, begins to descend into Jerusalem. Let's go through that very slowly. When he begins shooting arrows in all directions of the sky, and each of them lands in Jerusalem, it tells him that the Almighty is interested in destroying his house. That Rome, in a way, is an agent of the Almighty to do this. Then he stops a kid and asks him, "What have you been learning at school, little Jewish boy?" And the child answers him with the verse from Ezekiel 25:14, where it says, "I will take my vengeance against Edom, against Rome." The Jewish people will seek vengeance upon Rome, my vengeance for what they have done. What does Nero now see? He sees the ultimate expression of God's anger. God's anger against Rome. Let's stand back and look at that anger. Who is God really angry at? Right now, as Nero is descending upon Jerusalem, who is God angry at? The answer is, he's angry at his people. He's angry at the Jewish people. He's ready to destroy his house. What level of anger, so to speak, the Almighty God is feeling? Let's say maybe a 9.2 level anger. He's ready to destroy Jerusalem. Now, let's say Rome goes through with it, and let's say Rome destroys Jerusalem. How angry God should be with Rome. Rome destroyed God's people, but friends, it's a little complicated, right? Because they were sort of God's agents, so he can't be angry at Rome. A 3.5 or 4 level anger at Rome. But that's not the level of anger that God will feel according to the verse. That's not what the child tells Nero. What does the child say according from Ezekiel? I will destroy Rome with my vengeance. God, what are you doing, God? You're taking out your 9.2 level anger at us. Who are you angry with your 9.2 level? To the Jews, and you dump your anger which you have to the Jews on us? And in the words of the sages in the Gemara, it says that the Holy One wants to destroy his own house, and he wants to wash his hands with me. I'm getting out of here, Nero says. And Nero basically retreats, and he basically converts to Judaism. So the question, friends, is, who is the hero of the story? Strangely, but truthfully, it is Nero. He's the one who puts a stop to this. What's happening here? The Almighty God is mirroring the folly of his children. He's basically doing the same thing what his children are doing to others. God is now coming to destroy the temple. Why? For the sin of baseless hatred. The baseless hatred that has created these chain reactions, and now it is getting out of control and is consuming everything. This chain reaction. And now, how will God destroy his people? In a mirror image of that hatred. In the same way you hate others, and I'm also going to be destroyed by God. God is saying that I will use the same sort of corrupted, baseless rage that you human beings have been wielding so destructively. That itself will become the divine agent that I will destroy Jerusalem. I'm going to do it with Nero, and then I'm going to blame it. I'm going to blame him. When Nero, in the end, realizes what's going on, he stops that cycle. When he comes to understand that the master of the universe, as it were, is taking out anger on him that rightfully belonged directly somewhere else, he stops the cycle. Not only does he come to understand God's rage for what it is, but he comes to reevaluate Rome's own rage against the Jewish people. He sees the reaction of Rome as an overreaction that it really is, and abandons his campaign. Yes, years later, Vespasian basically again threatens the Jews, but for the time being, Nero has put an end to this devastating cycle of displaced hatred. So the question is, what is the meaning of Sinat Kinah? For what is Sinat Kinah? What is baseless hatred? It is not hatred without cause. There's always a cause. It is hatred that cannot adjust downward. It is disproportionate hatred. Hatred whose degree is baseless. Yes, you should be angry, but how angry? The Kamsa and Bar Kamsa stories highlight a great dilemma for all of us, and they hit very, very close at home. Sinat Kinah is not for other people, it is for us. No matter how good we are faced with that challenge. We got our fail-safe mechanisms. We are not just going to overreact just like that. But sometimes those safety valves basically get evaded, and the best of us can become victims of baseless hatred. We are being victimized. We'll victimize others. The chain reaction will continue till someone has the sanity to stop it. What does that sanity consist of? I want to leave you with the notion that it consists of an obligation that rests on each and every one of us. The first two safety valves are instinctive. Those safety valves are good, but they are not enough. God expects us not just to rely on our instinctive safety valves, but to use our conscious mind. We must not just be contented to ask ourselves, am I justified in being angry at this person? We have to ask ourselves, am I justified in being this angry at him? The level of anger that I'm feeling based on the information that I have now, is that level of anger justified? Or should I be less angry at him? If the feast maker had asked that question, the story would never have happened. If Bar Kamsa would have asked that question, the story would never have happened. If Rome would have asked that question, the story would never have happened. This is the question we must ask. It is the question that we have to ask when our little children or our little girl spills orange juice on the floor. We find ourselves strangely being a little bit too angry. Did something else happen? Did your boss yell at you at work? What are you angry about? Your spouse forgot your birthday? Okay, you're a little annoyed, but are you a little bit annoyed, or are you very annoyed? Are you really rageful? Or if you really find yourself being very annoyed, then instead of just dumping it on somebody, why did you forget my birthday? Ask yourself, what are you really angry about? You do all this work and they never appreciate you. They have never apologized for the pain they caused for 5 years ago, something like that. Well, then it pays to get in touch with what something like that actually is, and have the honesty to be angry at that something. Because if you know what that real thing is within you that is troubling you, you can deal with it. But if you don't deal with it, the problem is many of us, we dump it into the birthday. And friends, that is baseless hatred. You have taken the degree of anger, heightened it to an irrational stage, and made it impossible to tame down to flames. All you're doing is provoking your spouse to look at you as an irrational human being, or to lash out irrationally at you or at someone else, as this chain reaction basically continues. Tish B'Av, I pray that we would commit ourselves not to initiate that chain reaction. Realize that Sinat Kinah isn't something for other people. It's not for monsters. It is something for each of us as we struggle with these things very often without realizing that we are struggling with it. So next time you feel this righteous rage, question your instincts. Before you react in anger, ask yourself, I'm feeling angry, yes, but this angry? Do you need to really feel this angry? And that one question, friends, can save you. It can save your loved ones and maybe even the entire Jewish people a great deal of pain. The greatest thing our rabbi taught us is the power of forgiveness. Even in the Lord's Prayer, what did he teach us? He told us in Matthew 6:12 that forgive our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. That same amount of anger the people were showing one to another, that same level of anger, he mirrored it back unto the people and gave it back to them. In other words, the whole temple and this whole situation of destruction came not because of Hashem, because we have invited this evil to come upon us. It's the same thing. Every time we say the Lord's Prayer, when we say, forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors, all we are telling Hashem is that if we have forgiven our debtors, if we have not forgiven people who have offended us, Lord, don't forgive us. Friends, we need to understand something. Forgiveness is not a feeling. Forgiveness is a choice. Forgiveness is an act of obedience. Forgiveness sets you free. The question is, how often do we forgive? He told us very often, 70 times 7, every day for the same person. We need to understand forgiveness is our breastplate of righteousness. Forgiveness is our protection. Last week, we talked about this action, the power of Rachel's action, not tears. Jeremiah very clearly says that Hashem rewarded Rachel for her actions. Even in the story of the Bar Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story, it is the action of Nero that basically stopped the chain reaction from him. And because of that, through his generation, a righteous soul was born. That night concerning Rachel, the night of the Dudaim or the mandrakes, when Rachel re-engineered the past, she was able to rectify the damage that her sin had committed. Just as Rachel was willing to forfeit her honor and glory to rectify her past, giving Jacob to Leah, Messiah was also willing to forfeit honor and glory to rectify the past. Why? It is the past of Adam himself, the man. On the night that Issachar was conceived, Rachel was willing to give up her life. What was her life? Her life, it was her husband. That was the source of her existence. And by giving up, choosing to be not with Jacob, she altered everything in time. For that act of sacrifice, Joseph was born to her. Very, very significant. Why? Because the birth of Joseph was a sign that he would also have to forfeit honor and glory for the survival of his brothers. Joseph, was willing to basically accept suffering and rejection. That was a foreshadow of the Messiah who will come to the Jewish people. And instead of reigning like a king, he had to sacrifice his life to enable the survival of his people, which exists till today. Instead of fighting hate with retribution, Messiah has conquered it with love. Very, very important, friend. If we follow Jeremiah's advice, the greatest thing that can be done to rectify the error and damage of Tishbe Av is not to be sad and cry about the past, because we can't fix what was destroyed. The temple is gone. Rachel's sadness did not move God, but it was her actions. Friends, Yeshua's tears did not move God. It was his actions. We see in the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, it was Nero's actions. And Yeshua himself said, please move this cup, but not my will, but yours be done. It was his actions that moved God. It was Joseph's actions that moved God. It was Nero's actions in the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story that moved and did miraculous in his life. Many of times, We treat each other with sinat kinam, hate without a cause because of doctrinal indifferences. Believers treat each other with sinat kinam and expect Hashem to move on their behalf because the believers have shed a few tears. No, we don't embody what Messiah stood for. How do we, if we don't embody what Messiah has stood for, how do we expect Hashem to move on our behalf? Friends, it is not enough to open the book of Lamentations and read it and feel sad. Do what Rachel did. Do what Nero did. And basically by doing so, they stop the chain reaction. You have an issue with your brother. You have an issue with your sister. Don't just say, I forgive them and let them go. No, that's not enough. You need to rectify the past. You need to go to them physically. You need to go and talk to them. We, as the body of Mashiach, we cannot ignore Tish B'Av. We cannot say Tish B'Av is not relevant because we have the Messiah. Tish B'Av should be more relevant to us as believers than the non-Jewish community or the non-believing Jewish community. Why? Because we need to embody what he acted out. If we don't embody what Yeshua acted out, then Tish B'Av is irrelevant. We are on the process of leading up to Rosh Hashanah, to Yom Kippur, where everybody is taught to reconcile with their brother and sister. Tish B'Av is the great introduction to the high holidays. After Tish B'Av, it carries us through the 7 weeks of consolations in Isaiah. An individual needs to be able to go back in time. How? By doing it in the present. Just as Rachel, Joseph, Yeshua were able to re-engineer the past by rectifying the present day they were living in. You and I have the power to rectify the past by the choice that we make. Not just rectify, but we have the power to stop Sinat Kinam with us, just like Nero, that Roman emperor, did. You got a problem with someone, friends, I encourage you, don't just say I forgive them and let them go. Correct it, get right with it, because that when you do that action, that, my friend, that, my brother, sister, is the secret of Tish B'Av. The Messiah teaches us how to love and forgive our neighbors, and how to love my neighbor as I'm supposed to love Hashem. This is the action that prompted God to move on behalf of Rachel. Rachel's actions were able to outmerit Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. It's our actions, friends, that changes everything. It's not our crying about it. Joseph's actions, Messiah's actions, Nero's actions in the story we learned today were able to outmerit everybody because of their actions, of what they did to rectify. Messiah, he himself, he comes to rectify. The question this evening is, are you willing or are you desiring to rectify your past? Tish B'Av is about the day that God's presence left the temple, but the damages are still there. They are not rectified. Is our temple damaged? Another person's temple damaged? What are we going to do to rectify that? The same individual that we have a problem with is the same individual that was also created in the image of God. Yom Kippur, if you will, atones for sins except for that between man and man. Yom Kippur atones for sin between man and God. But to accept or receive the forgiveness of sin between man and God, we need to release forgiveness one to another. The question is, are you willing to rectify the damage? If Rachel would not have rectified the damage, re-engineered that last night, we would not have read about the state of Israel, the existence of the state of Israel as we do even today. The Jewish people would have had another story. But because she put herself in the shoes of her sister, she was willing to rectify. She understood what was God's will as she extended forgiveness and made peace with her sister. Joseph was able to do the same thing. Messiah was able to do the same thing. What about you and what about me? Are we able to step back with an issue we have a problem with? All these issues in the world today stem from people having problems with people. It doesn't start with us having problems with our cat or our dog or our cars. Hate without a cause is the root of the body of Messiah who has difficulties with each other. We must be willing to rectify, friends. God is not going to do it for us. We must do it. Until then, don't expect God to move on behalf of your tears. Tears, friends, are something to prompt us. Tears is something to convict us. Tears is something to propel us to do what we need to do to correct the damage that we have done. Tears are there for us to be restored to the place where we are supposed to be. But the tears just doesn't help. We have to do the action. Friends, this is the secret of Tisha B'Av and why Tisha B'Av is connected to the revelation of Mashiach, because the sages tell us the day the temple was destroyed is the day that Messiah was born. Not literally, it was the revelation of Messiah was born. So in other words, how do I get out of this mess in my life? Look at the one who came to teach us how to rectify the damage, who was done wrong, despised, rejected, and hated. He was designed from the very beginning, and he accepted his lot with joy. Like Joseph accepted his lot with joy, because that is who he is a foreshadow of. Joseph is a foreshadow of Mashiach. Therefore, if he can do it, we can do it. Because the New Testament says that greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. The power and source of rectifying is in the revelation of Messiah. That means if you and I believe that we are believers of King Mashiach, we believe in Messiah, then within us lies the power, within us lies the source, and we are able to rectify. It's not just enough to say, I forgive and let go. We need to back it up with actions. It is he who can re-establish and re-engineer the change of the past. The second is able to change the first, but it is up to the individual. We have the choice, my friends, but we also have the power. We can stop the chain reaction of sinat kinah, baseless hatred, hate without a cause in our steps. But we have to do that action. But because if we do that, then we begin to experience the power of God, and in our generations will be merited by God's favor and for his glory. So my prayer is that as we're getting ready to get into the high holiday season, consider any damages that we have done in the past. And I pray that before it's too late, may we go and fix and rectify the damage. Because the only thing that is preventing or stopping us from rectifying our damage and doing the actions is our ego. If Messiah is there to teach us and lead us, there is nothing stopping us. So may we all rectify our damages, and may God give us all victory in our lives, and may God restore all honor and glory to Israel as well. Amen and amen and amen. Shabbat Shalom, friends.
עזרי מעם השם עושה שמיים בארץ אל יתן למות רגליך אל ינום שומרך הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל השם צילך על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה. השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. השם ישמור